All right, let's review. I am right now putting in my choice of flat colors and what I call a layer my local colors. On my spot illustration. So this is what I have so far. That's on a gray background, that's on a white background. I often, for spot illustrations, like to make 3 separate background fills, black, white, and gray. So I can see what it looks, how the colors work on all 3 backgrounds. And if it works well in all 3 backgrounds, that means it's as versatile as I can make it. It means it will work on a dark shirt, a medium valued shirt, and a bright shirt. Right? Okay, but right now I just have my flat color, and I'm not finished with all my local colors. My first step was to use a basic flatting palette. And this is more of a professional step. And because you're working on your own work and you're not working as a flatting artist for another colorist or another digital artist, you don't necessarily need to do this step. It's the first time I've showed it in my class, but I wanted you to be aware of it. And what this flatting step is using really garish colors that are all very different from each other to block out each individual area. So it doesn't matter if it's on a gray background, white background, black background. These are all the flats, but this, I wanted to show you, this is actually filled in with a color. That's a flat color. And even though it looks like bright white, it's not bright white. It's this cloud color. This is a flatting palette you can easily find online. It's what's used for app development and for operating system icons. These are just the most easily recognizable and reproduced colors on the computer. It makes them very easily selectable. Now that's what's so useful, because then I make a duplicate of that flatting color layer and I start replacing those colors very easily with my own color selection. So I haven't replaced all of them yet. I've only replaced, that red, this, the color of the tunic, things like that. So I'm going to keep going with that to finish my flats. So for instance, if I think this water looks too blue and shiny, because I already have that flatting layer, I just select it with anti-alias checked, but with contiguous turned off. And you'll see it selects all of that color everywhere that color exists. And then I can very easily select a different color from a different palette. Now this palette I really like. It's the color code palette pre-digital coloring. So in old comic books, like I used to read as a kid, my grandmother had a collection of like old Harvey comic books that I grew up on. Richie Rich was my favorite, but they only were allowed these colors, these 63 colors, 63 colors as mixes of CMYK, because these are the inks that these colors will print with. And these are the old formulas for those, without the color separation and higher resolution of printing on millions of colors. So this is the print colors available with those inks on bad newsprint paper. So I like to use this palette. Now I want something that looks kind of murky, like oily water, but still has color to it, because my black outlines go on top of it. I'll use my paint bucket. I'll hold down Option to select the color, and then I can paint it in. Sometimes I'll just use a really big brush, paint it in everywhere. And I can see if I like that. Yeah, that's a pretty good flat color to start with. Okay, now the clouds, maybe the smoke, that's not exactly what I want. So I select all of that. And now I'm going to pick a different color for that. And I want it to be dark, but I'm going to add a lot of highlight to it. I don't know if I want it to be so cold looking. So let's try this kind of warmer smoke color. Let's try Try something else. No, too colorful. Let's try the same color I used for the inside of the shadow there. So I'm not in love with any of these, and I'm not limited to these. So what I'll do is I'll get something that I think is close, like the one I had, and then I can go to the actual color selector within Photoshop, and I can just play with it a little bit. So let's just make that one a little bit lighter. And we'll go with that for now. But you know what the real problem is that's just too much space to be filled in with one color. So I'm going to need to do something beyond flat coloring to make that as active as I want it to be. Okay, next, what about this flame? I haven't made a decision about that yet in my local colors. So maybe something a little more ochre-y, a little bit more brown in it. Maybe something a little brighter, just a touch. And I can just use the paint bucket directly that way. All right, so I've almost replaced all of my flat colors with new colors. The only ones I haven't replaced are the rocks themselves, which I think is a pretty good. Oh no, I'll replace those. Why not? Maybe something a little bit warmer. There we go, that kind of greenish gray. All right, now that kind of ring of purple that outlines everything at the water line, I'm going to pick a color for that. I want it to be light and kind of weird looking, but not the same color I just used for the rock. Maybe this. I can use the magic wand, select all of it everywhere in the image, and then I can use my paintbrush and paint that all in. Then I can always use my history to decide if I liked it better before or not. So from here to here. Do I like the purple or the warmer? I think I like the warmer. All right, so now I've replaced every flatting color with my own local flat color. Now, the problem with starting there and just picking your own colors is because they're not as useful as the flats. They're not as indistinguishable from each, or they're more indistinguishable from each other. So it's hard to select the skin tone from this tone, whereas my flats make those a lot more obvious. So that's the only reason you might do flatting. It helps in the long run. Once you have all your flat color like this, then it's time to start adding to those flat colors. So at this point, I'm going to save it. That's a big milestone for this piece. And this illustration almost works as it is because it's got so much shading in the inking. It doesn't need a whole lot of extra shading and highlights in the coloring, but I think I'm going to do it in little ways to help it. But let me demonstrate with, let me see, one of these other examples. Just so I can show you the whole process more quickly in a less complicated illustration. So let's take this guy, the little floating link figure. And what do I do once I have that EPS? I open a new Photoshop file. I make sure it is large, 13 inches wide, 19 inches tall by 350. And I'll call this my link coloring test. And this might be very similar to the line work, the vector line work that you've come up with. So I take my EPS file, I drag and drop it. That's very important so that I can size it to the right resolution as a smart object that cannot be edited without being rasterized, and I never want to rasterize it. So instead I'm going to lock that layer. I'm going to lock the background layer by double clicking it, renaming it blank white, and then locking it, and then I'm going to put a color layer in between. So it's like white bread on the bottom, all your colors and sandwich fixings, peanut butter, jelly, lettuce, however many color layers you want to add have to go between these two layers. Your white bread on the bottom, your dark wheat bread at the top, because these are your black lines. Okay, now, in between, my first layer in most basic coloring is what's called flat color. If we look at that handout that's available to you in Canvas to download, in this little box here, these are all the digital coloring steps. So we've sketched it, we've made a vector line work. Flat color is local color. That's the color the thing is, no matter the light source. So if Link's skin, I'm going to use from this palette, but I can use from any other. You know, I could go and find an image of Link from video game art that I want to try to match, or something else.
What was the size of the canvas we were supposed to use again?
13 by 15, I'm sorry, 13 by 19 inches by 350 pixels per inch. That's the largest we can print in the lab. So that's the resolution. But the beauty of having a vector smart object as your outline is, let's say you screwed that resolution up and you wanted to enlarge it later, your line work would perfectly match whatever new resolution you set. So that's why having the vector line work is so helpful. All right, so I'm going to pick a green, and I'm going to fill his cloak in with green or his hat in with green, and because they're enclosed shapes, I can just use the magic wand, turn on contiguous, and use my vector layer to select all the things that I think should be green, like his boots, like his hat, like his cloak, like the top of the leaf that he's holding, all the contained shapes, right? Then I simply use my paint bucket, I go to my flat color layer, I've selected the color already, it's showing there, and then I just drop it in, and it will fill all of those on my flat color layer with that color. So flat coloring does not need to be so arduous as I've shown in the illustration I'm doing. Now the bottom of the leaf might have a different local color. You know, the bottom of leaves have a different color than the top of them, no matter the lighting condition. So I'll select a different green, and then this looks pretty self-contained. So I'm gonna use the magic wand, hold down Shift, make multiple selections to get the flat color here. And then I go back to my flat color and I drop it in just once with my paint bucket. All right, Link's little cloak I think is more of a tan color, so I'm gonna select that. But it gets into his skin as well. So I can't use the selection for that. I'll show you how I get around that. And I can't do it for that leg, but maybe I can do it for this leg, this arm, and his little carrying bag. Maybe his strap too. And his shirt underneath. Maybe I'll make that neck skin color though. So let me hold down Option and get rid of that one. All right, now I use the paint bucket and I drop a tunic color in, maybe this one. Remember, you want to do it on the flat color layer. Okay, now I'm going to use that same color, and I'll just use my paintbrush with a very hard edge and paint it on that flat color layer. Because if you can't select it and fill it, you can always paint it. Or you can paint around it.